As you can tell, we have a number of guests here, and I have the honor to introduce Jearlyn Steele. Jearlyn is a member of an internationally acclaimed family, as probably most of you know, the Steeles. They performed at Carnegie Hall, the Super Bowl. They performed with Prince, of course. And Jearlyn, who is an international speaker, she's a TV entertainment reporter for Twin Cities Public Television. And we all know her on Sunday nights on WCCO with Steele Talking. Love that show. I relax to that show for over 20 years. She's won a Midwest Regional Emmy for her narration of the TPT documentary Flower Power. She has, and this is where her education piece comes. This is very important to her. Literacy and education. She has a BA in organizational leadership from Concordia, an honorary doctorate from the University of Indianapolis, and beginning in the fall, very excited for her, she'll be attending Luther Seminary to finish her master's in leadership and innovation in ministry. She served on the board of Chrysalis, a center for women and her families, where I first met her over 20 years ago. She is my mentor and has been all this time. She is a mother of two and a grandmother of 2 and a half.
2 and a half.
2 and a half. It is my honor to introduce my dear friend, Jearlyn Steele, and a friend to Literacy Matters.
Thank you. First of all, I want to say how honored I am to have this difficult conversation. But once we leave here, once we leave this meeting, whether you're on Zoom or in this room, I promise you, you will feel better about some things. So what do we want from you? What do I want from you? I want you to say what you want to say and let the words fall out. Honestly, I want to see you be brave. That's what I want. So let's get to it.
Thank you for being here. The other person in the room, in case you haven't seen this tall human being behind me, you may know him from the Gophers or the Timberwolves. I know him to be my mentor and my teacher. John has been at my side since the beginning of this and years beyond. He currently serves as the Vice President of Basketball Development, and he is using that platform for good in the community. I would not be standing here without him. He makes me a better me. He helps me when I'm feeling down, and he helps me be strong and stand taller, though not as tall as John in so many ways beyond his height. John is the parent of 3 beautiful children and his wife Heidi, who are close to our family, and you could not have a better mentor, friend, board member, father, husband. He is my other person, besides my husband also, who's in the room. So without further ado, John.
I've learned to be vulnerable. I would share with you that when I was initially asked to have this conversation on behalf of Literacy Matters as a board member, but certainly as someone who grew up not far from where George Floyd was killed, I would tell you the title of the book made me nervous. I would tell you that when growing up in Minneapolis and having issues of racism, prejudice, unconscious bias, as I wove my way through becoming an athlete, playing in the professional ranks, and then ultimately become now where I stand as a vice president inside of a very visible public organization, I would tell you that my heart races at first, wanting to learn more about not only this topic, but being able to embrace our community with love. The feeling that I had when George Floyd was killed put me into a new space that, as I looked around the years of what I've done on the basketball court, it certainly pales in comparison into the type of work we need to do today. So I'm here to be a part of a conversation, to educate myself, to, rather than understand, because I never will, relate, and ultimately create next steps towards sustained impact that ultimately I believe we can change this world together. So thank you.
Okay, so the bottom line is, when you hear a book called White Fragility, what do you think? What does it make you think of? Where do you stand with just that term and that term alone? White fragility. Her name is Robin DiAngelo. Let's take a look.
Hello, I'm Robin DiAngelo, and I'm very pleased to know that Literacy Matters will be engaging with my work on white fragility. It is critical that white people build our capacity to withstand the emotional discomfort of these conversations, because our inability for far too long has allowed us to behave in very harmful and punitive ways, perhaps unintentionally, but again, harmful nonetheless. And it has allowed us to engage in these ways with no accountability. So we do need to build our capacity. However, the forces of the society are very strong. They're very seductive. If we don't put supports around ourselves, we will just be pulled back into the status quo. So don't consider this to be the only time you grapple with these dynamics. This is lifelong work. It is also the most liberating, transformative work, certainly that I have ever engaged in.
The author of this book. Think about that. I didn't expect it. Her name is Robin DiAngelo. To me, I thought it was a black woman. And I kept trying to figure out, how would a black woman do writing the book called White Fragility? I don't know about you, but I don't think anybody would buy it. What do I know about white fragility? My perspective is different. Let's hear from John what he thought about it.
From my perspective, as I shared, through this process, what it's meant for me is to, again, take away the word understand. And using the word fragility along with white has taught me a lot. And the feeling that I get when I read the book and when I have the conversations and I'm being asked on multiple occasions to speak on these aspects, it came down to, how do I understand as best as I can, relate and educate? There are so many different people across this world that have had different works, who, in my opinion, in a lot of ways are more qualified to have the conversation about race. And so I also think, what does a white person know about what it's like to be black? No different than what I know what it's like to be a woman and to bear children. So I oftentimes think about the ways in which unconscious bias, and when you dive deep into sort of our animal brains and we see something that looks different than us, and due to lack of real understanding or fear, or because we ultimately don't spend enough time to dig beyond what we see on the surface, which all of us have in comparison is the roots that make us who we are, we can never understand. There's parts of the book that I could say, you know what, I nod. And there's parts of the book where I shake my head. And on the far side, on both of those, I shake it vehemently and nod vehemently. So my role, I believe today, is to create a conversation, to understand at least what it meant for you. It's different if we all sit together and just have this conversation amongst ourselves, but I think the power of exercising the platform and utilizing technology to get us all in front of each other, I hope that this isn't the last time we have this conversation. And there's so much more that we all need to learn from each other. And the thing that sport has brought me is that it brings a common enemy, and that is the basketball court. So when you think about the ways in which life and business are uneven playing fields and nobody knows the rules, it's different in sport. And both white and black people have had success on those playing fields. So for me, the feeling that that evokes, that the book brought to attention, was less about whether I agree or disagree, but more importantly, because everyone has a perspective, ultimately, where are we trying to go as a country? And how do we rally around a difficult conversation to move us towards the positive nature of where we all want to be in society?
That positive nature is not easy to approach or to receive. A lot of times we tuck away our positive relationships with others, right? We don't want to get too close. My first experience when I moved to Minnesota in 1978, I worked at First National Bank of St. Paul. Y'all youngins don't know about that, right? And there was this beautiful white woman that befriended me. I had never had a white friend before. I come from Gary, Indiana, a chocolate city, right? I didn't see white people in the school. I didn't see white people in the church. I didn't see white janitors. I saw people of color everywhere I looked. Then I went to Ball State University. My life changed in Muncie, Indiana. My first relationship with a white person was a white roommate. Her name was Karen, and she was from the farm area, wherever that was. I'm a city girl. She brought roosters to put on the wall. I brought earth, wind, and fire. Right? We didn't have conversations at all until one night was all it took. One night. She was on the top bunk, I was on the bottom bunk. She said, Jearlyn, tell me what it's like growing up in Gary, Indiana. And it opened our world. I asked her, what is it like on the farm? And it opened my world. It only takes one conversation to begin. Just begin it. And we're beginning it today. So if you have a question, you want to come up to the mic and ask it, we are encouraging you to do so. We do have a question?
D'Angelo said in her introduction, and I wrote this down, that we need to engage, or white people need to engage with accountability. And Jearlyn then followed that up with, I thought it was a black woman that wrote the book and that nobody would buy it. And as a historian, our responsibility to center this conversation around scholars, authors, and intellectuals, black intellectuals that have done the work for 200 years. And so the irony that a conversation about racism is now centering a white author who, in my opinion, is a corporate Kim Kardashian in the ways that she has commodified something that should not be commodified, regardless of rate or speaking, fee. We have to have these conversations with black intellectuals centered. And I want us to be able to hold people accountable of all races to do the work. So my question is, with a plethora of black intellectuals who've created an extensive library on racism, why are we centering a white author who argues for an inherent exception to being morally and ethically present when dismantling racism?
Great question. What is your first name? Annie. Annie, hi Annie. Okay, so here's the deal. If not Robin DiAngelo facing her own people with this particular subject, then who? Who is it supposed to be? Is it supposed to be me? Would you listen to me if I were the one to write the book? If not her, then who? Anyone?
Baldwin, Davis, Eddie Glaude. I mean, there's extensive library on racism. But let's address and name the fact that you're saying there's an argument that we won't study it, we won't learn it, we won't engage unless it's complicated. So it's ironic, yes, that we can't have this conversation without a white author as a text. Like, that's problematic.
It's not that we can't have the conversation without a white author. It's that we open our minds up. White people open their minds up when it's someone who looks like them. I open my mind up when it's someone who looks like me. My daughter just got her PhD last year from the University of Pennsylvania. And let me tell you, she had that same struggle when writing her dissertation, right? She loved the book. She finally picked it up. It took a while for her to pick it up off the table. Someone gave it to her. She never bought it. And now she tells everyone, whatever you do, no matter what color you are, read the book. Now, whether you and I agree with that, maybe not. But as many minds that can open up, Annie, as many. I don't care if it's one more than yesterday. I'm all for that. John?
Annie, the more that I've gotten to know you, the more I'm appreciative of the depths of your soul. I stand before you. If none of you have known who I am, if it were not for television and the culture that celebrates me taking an orange ball and putting it through an iron ring, you would see a 6'8" black man. I identify with black. I grew up black culture, although I have a lighter hue than some of my dark-skinned brothers and sisters. I know that before a word comes out of my mouth, because of what's happened in this country, that people will judge me without understanding the content of my character or the depths of my spirit that go well beyond the surface that they can see. Coronavirus, coupled with my wife's love for beards, is why I grow the beard. Somebody then asked me, do I actually grow that in protest? Because I believe that as the only senior black executive on our team, and knowing that as a recent statistic, there are 79 sports leaders in this town, and of those 79, 71 of them are white. That is a surface level type of conversation that we can all start to unpack. And I would share with you, and as you've also worked for the Lynx organization, what does diversity mean? Right? The Lynx are the epitome of diversity. Could they get more women of color? Absolutely. When you look on our team side specific to what we do, and me being the only black senior executive, absolutely. So I look at it as, and I've said this previously, it's incumbent upon me now that if I've played professional basketball and have gone through all of the ranks, and this happened in my very neighborhood where somebody was killed for 8 minutes and 46 seconds in front of us, who's responsible for teaching others who look like me that what I do currently as a vice president, not only who played in the NBA, but all across the world, and now takes an executive role, who's responsible? Because I've seen white counterparts go into our neighborhood. You don't look like me, sound like me at all. So it's incumbent upon me. I love the fact that you bring up the depths of a conversation that needs to be had around who are the other scholars of color who have been doing this work for so long and have made this their life's work. That's a very important conversation topic that I would want personally to continue with you, but more broadly within our audience, because at the end of the day, perspective is a thing that if I'm looking over here versus looking over here and they're saying, no, you don't see what I see. They're both right. But they're morally, what we're saying is the systemic oppression that's happened with the fact that I can't feel like I can wear a beard because my white counterparts don't look like me. Or even if I had my hair long as I was going through a phase and I looked to the person next to me and they're looking at my hair, the barrier to entry is the color of my skin from the moment that I'm born in this country. So how do I teach others that you don't have to assimilate, but you have to understand the rules. And until we can truly build our own and understand, this is something that I've heard, a white man in America never has to interact with a black person and still can create success. But a black man in America has to, on a daily basis, interact with white people, but if we are to get ahead, then we have to also understand the rules. There are 621 billionaires in this country. 6 of them are black. So it tells me, aha, it's possible. So what's broken? That's when you start to get into issues of redlining. aspects of where you're born in your zip code and saying that there's racial covenants, even in not only in Minnesota, but across the country that say, I don't care how much money you have color on your skin, you can't live here. So then the parents teach their kids that. Why? Because I don't understand the culture. I don't understand, and we all have had bad experiences. I don't care with what color, but that is the exception, it is not the rule. But the problem is the stereotypes that continue to be the dark cloud over our heads, specifically with me, black, tall, athlete, people who don't know me. You play basketball? You don't know the depths of my soul. I love you for what you stand for, and I can't wait to continue the conversation.
Any questions?
I hear what you're saying. I chose the book. It was my idea to choose the book, not theirs, so I will own that. When I started this idea that we would hold this gathering, it was because I wanted to bring white people to the conversation, because I think it's incumbent upon us to do the work. I know that people of color are being inundated with questions. It is not incumbent upon them to educate me. It is incumbent upon me to re-educate myself, if that makes any sense to you. I'm trying to get people to understand where their unconscious bias is and to bring them to the table, to the conversation, and to be the change. This has been a generations-old problem. It has led to so many societal issues, and we need to understand our role and how we played a role in this process. So the goal of tonight was to address systematic degradation, miseducation, misinformation, and the situation we're in now, which is people are dying of color, they're unable to live, our children can't go to school. I need everyone to be a part of the conversation, and I need people who look like me to do the work so that we can better understand how to do better moving forward, and we don't continue to the next generation.
Do we have any questions? We don't want to leave anyone out. Thank you, Annie, for that comment. It's really appreciated. Please know that when John said that, well, how did it go? I had it in my head. That we have to really pay attention who's in our circle. I'm summarizing. We have to pay attention because poison comes in and out of our lives. And what we read, what music we listen to, all of it helps us to become who we are becoming. And we never stop becoming until we're dead. Think about that. So I don't care if it's white children, black children, or children of the world. We are the world, right? There are so many relationships and so many marriages now that have children that are very mixed. I love it. When will we stop looking at each other's color? What hue is it that's perfect? What hue is it? Right? So as you listen to this conversation from a perspective of a white woman in a book, if you've read it, or to hear other people talk about what they gleaned from that book, this is not a book club, by no means. That's not what we're here for. We're here to try to get an understanding between each other. So please don't be concerned or afraid to come to the mic and talk to us. I want to talk to you. I want to hear what you have to say, what every one of you has to say, if there is something you want to say. Just remember, we see each other, whether you like it or not. Whether someone wants to walk across the street and walk away from me, I've experienced that. Have you? So when he was talking about, you got to be careful what the contract is. I mean, what if someone said to us, if you are going to assimilate, if you don't want to assimilate, you have to assimilate because we're telling you that's the rule. That's what I was trying to remember. The rule. What if the rule was you have to assimilate? What would you do? Would you raise up like so many others? What would you do? You have a question, sir?
I do. Let's go over the microphone.
The video.
It's not yours to have to answer. I guess perhaps it's even rhetorical on some level. But the thing that sort of crosses my mind so frequently is, how do I, as a suburban white guy, if I want to put myself in a box, no matter how woke I may be or not be, participate in a conversation or open a dialogue when I have no right, no firsthand information, no true understanding of what it's like to be black or African American. I watched the movie, the documentary 13th, and Angela Davis and all these great people were in it, and then a couple of white professors from, I don't know, University of Iowa, and I thought, well, what's he doing in there? He doesn't know what he's talking about. I want to hear from the African American people that were speaking instead, despite whatever integrity he may have. I discounted his own comments, despite them being real, because I thought, well, he doesn't know what he's talking about. And I know that I squelched my own thoughts at times, like, I can't participate in this because my demographic is part of the problem that has gone on for so long. And so I'm not asking for you to tell me how to get over that. I just don't know how to get over that.
I learned through this process and what it's meant for me when I have my black counterparts say, well, now you want to listen. We've been saying this for so long, and now you want to take an active part in this conversation? I've also heard white people say, I don't know, should I reach out? I don't want to do it, because if I do, then I'm only reaching out because they think it's because of the difficult times that's happening now, but also because they're black. The approach that I've taken throughout this entire process for me, and certainly it's been a rapid learning as a former professional basketball player. I've had to unlearn a lot of what I've learned. But I would ask both sides as best as possible to lean in to each other, to lean into your discomfort. The best way I know how is what's happened to me through sport. And I could share that it didn't matter if you were standing next to me, what the color of your skin was, or where you had gone to school, or oftentimes there could be some disagreements that we've had based upon just moral principles or values. What I've learned is that we were fighting the common enemy of the elements. Like, damn, man, we gotta go run these lines. So when we find a common enemy, we can rally around it. That's what I believe today. The common enemy is racism. And the first place that I start with is not here, it's here. So when I think about the circles of influence, there's absolutely not a single one of you that knows me more than me. So as I extend my circles of influence, it means that as a 44, almost 45-year-old black man, I've spent more time with me and I have my perspective. So through that process, I then look at my influence. When I say something, do something, whatever my actions, from that, it's my family. I love them. I give them my time, my sweat, my blood, my everything. From there, it's friends and coworkers. And oftentimes in this country, your coworkers can become your friends because of how much time we spend at work. And then lastly, community. Outside of the community, both in person and in social media, I cannot change people's opinion, right? No different than, as an example, I was in a Sports Illustrated article, and if I went on social media, people wouldn't even dare to think about reading it. They would look at the headline. So no different than when we look at the headline of a book, White Fragility, there are people possibly that said they go into it automatically with minds closed. So from that perspective, and I would be remiss if I talk about the divisiveness that social media creates, which is this fire that is separating our country. It lacks context, right? If you've imagined, even on Zoom calls, for those who are currently not showing your face, my unconscious bias creeps in. And And I say, why? I cannot see them, therefore I cannot trust. That's a feeling that I have. But ultimately, if I'm watching this, the fact that you showed up, my conscious mind says, yes, you're here for a reason. As we start to see people's faces, we want to see your faces. Your beautiful white, brown, black faces. We need to see your faces. It is, for those that have interacted with me personally, I'm a huge believer in a handshake. I want to know what your posture is like. I want to know if you lock eyes with me. I want to test the firmness of your handshake. Zoom doesn't allow that. So again, I digress. In pulling it back, I only look at the way in which I influence. So to your answer, kind sir, you have to ally with yourself first. You have to educate yourself in your own discomfort and recognizing that the color of my skin has nothing to do with happening inside of my soul. So learning about the atrocities of our country that were on the backs of on the backs of black people, that's important to understand. Then think about the ways in which you interact with black people and how can you meet them where they're at to learn more about them. So that's what I would share.
In order to have a conversation, right, start a conversation, you have to really want it. There's no doubt about it. At the same time, if you look at our country, a lot has been rewarded through diplomacy. A lot of conversations have been had at tables and coffee tables and in backyards at barbecues. And it's that diplomacy that we each have an opportunity to use. We are diplomats, first and foremost, when it comes to having a conversation with someone who believes differently than I do. Think of yourself as a diplomat every day. When you wake up, you are a diplomat. When you go to sleep, you went to sleep as a diplomat, if that's what you can receive and accept. So on my radio show, I have had death threats when I first started at WCCO. Immediately, they told me they would be waiting outside to cut my throat. And every time I would come outside for a year, there was someone in a truck watching me, always parked across the street. I had two choices, run or quit. And in my family, you don't do either. So what do we do when it comes to talking, having a conversation? When it gets too loud and too crazy, lower your voices. If you're screaming at me, saying, I don't understand what you're trying to tell me, and I say to you in return, it's okay. Scream it out. It's okay. And finally, you stop screaming. What happens in those little nanoseconds between the silence? We have an opportunity to affect each other, not infect, not pouring down our own understanding of what's going on and what we agree to and what we don't. This is a different time. Think of yourselves as diplomats. Use your voice to have the conversation. I asked my listeners, would you please start the conversation at Thanksgiving dinner? Phones went nuts. No way. I want my chicken in silence, right? And then there were those who called or wrote and said, I did. I tried it. Many got up from the tables in the house, but then they slowly come back as they stand leaning up against the pole waiting to see where this is gonna go. And before you knew it, they were calling each other a week after or maybe a month after, saying, can we talk? Can we go to coffee? Try that. Try diplomacy.
Sorry. Thanks for joining us. A question that I'm not going to probably articulate it the best, but I'll give it a run. What are your thoughts on how to foster conversations about fragility and empathy with students and within school structures and how to bring that up through different age levels? And then something that often I hear people struggling with is literature, within literature, words that hurt. And do we cut some of those books out that have those words? Or how do we use those as conversations, or should we use those as conversation points as we talk and work with young ones?
Oh my. Students are a whole other ballgame. So whenever I meet with or do workshops with young people, particularly high schoolers in 11th or 12th grade, the first question I ask is, what music do you listen to when you wake up in the morning? What wakes you up when your alarm goes off? What music do you listen to when you go to sleep at night? What music do you listen to study? Music is what? Transformational. Am I right about that? It's transformational. So every time you pour, whatever you pour into yourself matters. If you pour books into yourself, it matters. I told my daughter, if you're dating someone who reads only the Bible and romance novels, run. Run. It's not enough information. We're like computers. We need data. We need it. Right? Need to download, and you're downloading every day. No matter what you're listening to in your car, on your phone, with your earbuds. Some of you want to sing, and I encourage you to do it, whether you can or can't. But listen to the lyrics. And it was always rap when I asked them that question. Rap, or Insane Clown Posse. Anybody know who that is? Right? I knew who that was. Music can deliver a message that can incite us to anger or can inspire us and lift us up. Begin the conversations with students with music. They all understand music. Every one of them. Because we all listen to it when we can. We have it at our desk at work, whether it's talk radio or music. Every bit of it is pouring into this. Every word that you heard while you're walking down the street or opening your window and you hear the cacophony of sound from every person working, it matters. It absolutely matters. Start there. I promise you, they'll give you a little kernel of who they really are. And that's when you can start to say, what should they be listening to? Or maybe think about this. Consider this type of music. Whether it's Amazing Grace, how sweet the sound. Or whether it's got me looking so crazy in love, got me looking so crazy. You know, whatever it is. And then talk about the lyrics. If you hear somebody talking about they're going to spank somebody, they're going to hit somebody, they're going to shoot somebody, sit down and have the conversation and say, why do you listen to that? How does that bring you joy? Why does that bring you joy? Begin with the music.
Some people listen to the music, and other people resonate with the lyrics. The first place I start with in trying to learn more and relate to someone else is meeting them where they're at. Every person is unique in their own path, plight, specifically with children. If you're talking about those that face trauma versus those that do not, are we really listening? Or are we transacting as teachers? As a teacher, you are a shining example and an extension of my family that I would hope that you're teaching those children the values that ultimately lead themselves to creating prosperity for themselves, their family, and their community. So the first place I would start with, again, is here. And asking yourself tough questions around, how much do I listen? You see, sport has taught me that feedback is binary. When I shoot a jump shot, one of two things happen. It either goes in or it doesn't. So through my transition from sport into business, I've learned that oftentimes in the way in which coaches in a split second have to give me feedback, which could be expletive, they want me to move from point A to point B. So I've learned to absorb and to take feedback, a big reason as to why I'm here today. I want to learn. This isn't about me. I'm a conduit. I'm a vehicle. Right? I am an ambassador. So I have to listen 3 parts. And as For those that know me, probably talk too much. But at least from that perspective, I try to meet them where they're at. Who are their circles of influence? What are they seeing? What are some common threads? Right? Knowing that social media is the place that drips dopamine on them every single day and tells them they're great, or tells them otherwise through bullying. Pay attention. Pay attention to yourself first. Create some levels of self-awareness. Ask 360 degrees of feedback. If I shoot it, I know whether it's going in or not because I've practiced it enough. But I also need coaches to tell me, JT, you're leaning back too far. Right? You've got the ball on the palm of your hands instead of on your fingertips. We need to have trusted people that can provide us with feedback. So start with yourself. Listen, gain feedback, and take that data and ask yourself how you're improving on a day-to-day basis. And I would be remiss to not welcome the teacher who actually has dealt with students and who can certainly speak to this better than both of us can, because this is her life's work.
So I, like you, am an educator, and I think our most precious resource is children. We have students in our midst more hours in the day than their parents. So they're listening and they're watching. I don't know how to sing as Jearlyn does. There's a song, "Careful the things you say, children will listen." You have an enormous impact as a leader at your school, teachers at your school, and it all starts at the top in the leadership of a school. And if you know any book publishers, what I'd really like is for people to address our history books, which we're sharing with children, things such as when the slaves came to America. They didn't really come here as much as we dragged them in shackles, murdering them. Things that set the tone and tell the right side of history. We need a new perspective, and we need better education in the classroom. And hopefully some of that trickles home when they have a dinner conversation or they're sitting at that moment on a parent's lap. And sometimes children educate us. I learn every day and I'm inspired by people. My true inspiration comes from children because they are the future. So that's where I think we need to really invest our resources also.
I have two questions over here. The first one is from Andrea on Zoom. I've been asking my staff and family to read White Fragility and for us to discuss afterwards. It was meant to shine a light on ourselves and to recognize that just because we say we don't believe in racism, it doesn't necessarily mean we aren't acting to support white supremacy by our inactions. But perhaps these conversations happen, and then what? What is the call to action? Who should be taking to the next step to grow? It's one thing to read the book and talk. And then can you answer that question for Andrea?
Thank you, Andrea. In knowing what I can control, what coronavirus did for me is it caused me to pause on the busyness of my life like the rest of the world did. It caused me to become self-reflective and think about the things that I personally value and how much time was I actually spending around those things that I value. Then with the killing of George Floyd, it brought this sense of I'm being called upon to have these conversations, but am I even equipped to have these conversations? I'm only an expert at being a black man in America. The rest of the things that I've done throughout the course of my life, I've spent more time in. Certainly you could say that I was a professional expert at basketball, but I wasn't at the pinnacle either. So I think the way in which I've approached this was the same way. There are a ton of books, and certainly have we rioted before? Have we protested before? Have we been killed before? Yes, yes, yes. So what happens? It was important enough for me to say that when my life gets back too busy again, will I be able to take the issues of systemic oppression and social justice and do it in the manner in which my life's work can lead to change? Certainly won't happen in my lifetime, I recognize that. How do you expect the pendulum of 400 plus years to swing in a direction that ultimately would change in the snap of a finger? It won't. The thing that's different about now, because coronavirus stopped the world, it also then showed a man being executed. And it was less to do about where people are creating distractions around he was a criminal, he had drugs. The root of the issue is you're talking about those things because you don't recognize the human that is our brother that was killed in front of the world to see. It created this feverish, I have to do something. So I oversee our youth basketball programs. I mentor and help with basketball operations, help to mentor our current players around aspects of, there's so much more to the single stream of revenue that you could ever know, specific to this community. And as a player in this community, you can't tell me what it's like. I can share with you that it really is rooted in love. And then I also oversee our alumni program that has helped to teaching them that how do you create prosperity when the lights are off? I'm providing a window into my core responsibilities at work because how do I bring issues of social justice and change into my daily work? So as I shared on the front end, specific to a young black boy who grew up in South Minneapolis like I did, how do I show you how I got here? So I put that into not only through programs that certainly relative to a P&L that we would run that requires revenue, that substantiates the business, but more importantly on the other side, which is how am I doing the impactful work? How am I part of an organization that is doing the type of work that's necessary because I am and have lived through what it's like to be a basketball player. And oh, hey, by the way, there's so much more to it because more likely than not, just on numbers alone, you won't get there, but I'll never stop your dream. And I need to teach you aspects of image, communication, punctuation, professionalism, timeliness, right? English is the language of capitalism. So we have to understand that communication when we speak it, and because I grew up in South Minneapolis where I had bloods shooting outside of my home, the foundational elements of why I'm a part of this Literacy Matters Foundation is that education is what binds us. So that knowledge from that perspective means that I want to bring aspects of social justice into my daily work. And I'm thankful that I have an organization that certainly leans into that. And then certainly on behalf of the work that I do for Literacy Matters, there's a way for me now to create some other opportunities based upon how important it is for there to be literacy and justice for all.
My family, education meant a lot. It was a really big deal. My father was killed by a drunk driver when I was 14. He was 6 months from getting his degree, his bachelor's degree. He used to say all the time, honey, to my mom, we have got to, make sure we have enough money for all 6 of the children to go to college. And people felt that was insane. He worked at a steel mill. We had unions. They paid a fair wage, and he was able to build a house and send his children to college. How about that? That's remarkable. So we had books in our house. They were hidden in closets. I never understood that. For me, I need books to be around my home. I need it to be in my space. I'm on the radio only on Sunday nights from 7 to 11 p.m. 4 hours, that's all I get. For 20 years. But with that 4 hours, I realized that words really do penetrate. Someone that says to you, sticks and stones may break my bones, but words will never hurt me is all a lie. Words will hurt you worse than getting stabbed. It lingers inside of you. People used to say to me, Jearlyn, you're so overweight. When I was like 8 years old. Okay, so I was born a size 16. Get over it. Get over it. That's not who I am. Get to know me here and here. That's the most important part. So education has continued. We have lots of educators in my family. Literacy matters. I used to carry a dictionary in my purse whenever I would fly. I used to fly a lot to perform and speak. And I'm telling you, I would take it out. I don't care if I'm sitting in first class. I'm going to take my dictionary out and start looking up words as I'm reading a book and I don't understand a word. Finally, my cabin mates turned to me and said, "You have a dictionary?" I said, "Well, of course. If I don't know the word, am I going to sit here and act like I know the word?" That word could be the one word that would change the whole trajectory of this book. It could be the one thing that would help me understand it by the time I got to the end. He said, "That's what I'm going to do." Sometimes I bring these books or these magazines on like the New Yorker. I don't get the New Yorker sometimes, but I keep trying. So literacy does matter. Our conversations, our words matter so much. Our hands and our deeds are absolutely. But the conversations we can have, it could be just one word that you say that really was something that needed to be said. I was doing a performance once, and I came prepared to sing the song that the client wanted me to sing. But I had this stirring in my soul, and I kept saying, I really am supposed to sing this other song. I'm supposed to sing this other song. I'm supposed to sing this other song. But they're paying me to sing this song. I could have lost that client. In fact, I did. But I sang the song that was given to me to sing. I'm just a delivery person. I'm just here to deliver whatever the gift is. One person came to me afterwards with tears and said, "I needed that song just to heal. I needed that song. Thank you for bringing forward that song." If it's just one person that we can touch with literacy, just one person with words and learning and great teachers and great tools, by the way, we need great tools, then it's worth it. The struggle is real, but we don't always have to struggle. There will be one day we don't have to struggle collectively.
We have one more question. Well, we have lots of questions, but here's a question. This is for Dr. Madsen. Why is it so hard for whites to believe what we've been complaining about racism forever? What's so different to give us hope that things will change?
Repeat that, please.
Did you see that?
This is from Dr. Madsen. Why is it so hard for whites to believe what we've been complaining about racism forever? What's so different to give us hope that things will change?
It's so hard because it comes down to perspective. If you've never touched a hot stove, you can talk about what it's like to touch the hot stove, but you'll never understand what it's like to touch hot stove. You'll never understand that when I was a kid, riding through the neighborhood, not understanding that stop signs, I believe, it didn't apply to me as an 11-year-old boy as I was riding my bike through the neighborhood. And as I turn the corner, I get pulled over by police. As you can imagine, my 11-year-old was probably like a lot of 22-year-olds. But the most important factor was that I had the color on my skin. Rather than saying to me, "Hey, did you know that you need to stop at stop signs?" And realistically, from a bicycle's perspective in the neighborhood, do we really need to stop at stop signs? Sure, we do, but come on. You'll never understand what it's like if you haven't been racially profiled. So why is it so hard? Because they haven't had to deal with it. When you talk about the aspects of white privilege, you are privileged by nature that this country was initially founded by killing off of indigenous people and then ultimately saying, well, now that they're dead, we got to have people build this infrastructure. So when I say English is the language of capitalism, it's specifically for this country. So no, you'll never understand what it's like. No, again, no different than I understand what it's like to be a woman, or frankly speaking, to be another black man. I can relate. Two oak trees can relate to each other. But as I used the comparison below the surface, our roots all grow differently. And sometimes through those roots, there's a blockade. And that blockade might cause trauma to my roots. But you'll never be able to see it or understand it because it didn't happen to you. I'm optimistic that because for the first time, people are having conversations en masse. There are corporations that have been typically white that are now coming to the table and trying to come with tangible solutions. It's a beginning. It's not over, but it's a beginning. I'm gonna lean into that. I'm gonna lean into every aspect of being a great listener by educating myself, empowering myself and those around me to take a stand, to exercise your voice, to be vulnerable and say, I don't even know if this sounds right. Right? For fear of being ostracized, and we can be so cruel in our society. We welcome you to have the conversations. I'm so grateful to see so many beautiful faces that have joined, and even the faces that are here. I certainly don't ever recall a time in our country's history where people who look like me and people who don't look like me gather to at least relate to each other. So that's why I think, and I'm optimistic, I'm a glass half full type of person. I will lead my life with that energy, and I hope and certainly challenge you to do the same.
I'm going to use a 4-letter word, so just brace yourself. My favorite 4-letter word is hope. And I have hope now because something happened, I think, in our country. I can speak from my experience, my perspective. I think COVID leveled the playing field. We always say in our organization, first seek to understand, then be understood. I think there was a moment where all of us were afraid to go outside. We're still afraid. We don't know if we're going to be hit with something that can kill us. We're looking at a vulnerability that many of us have never felt until the pandemic. That was a changing moment, as John said. I think it was a changing moment for all of us to wake up and sort of have a better understanding of what it feels like to be very vulnerable. And so I challenge everyone to not look away after this wonderful conversation and to continue a conversation and to be a part of the change. I love seeing people visit the site where George Floyd was murdered and pay respects to somebody whose throat was crushed. I challenge you to sit as long as he did in just silence, to have a small understanding of what it's like. And I challenge you, after you've delivered a bag of groceries and diapers and formula, that we stay awake for the conversation. It took us over 400 years to get here. It's long overdue change. So tonight, after this conversation, I hope you'll continue to reach out and to read and educate yourselves and ask questions. I will tell you that I myself had a moment of deep shame. Nobody shamed me. We don't want to shame people, but I am ashamed for what I didn't know. She talks about in the book about white tears, and I have sent some letters to people who I have cried in front of, which is my white privilege. I didn't know that that was something that I took for granted, but in fact I do. So I encourage you to not just read the book or read any book that you can learn, and then together we'll know better and do better.
Are there any other questions in the room? Yes, here.
Hello, thank you for witnessing me. I'm also very passionate about change and being the catalyst to initiate change. And I have friends who are Black, and I also have friends who are in the police unit. And I'm interested about what could the dialogue look like to kind of bridge this relationship back into unity, and how can I help initiate that dialogue?
One of the things that I've seen, thank you for the question, one of the things that I've seen most specifically with the challenge and the relationship of the public and the police is at its core, most of us don't even know our rights. We don't understand the rules. We don't understand the policies that either are oppressive in nature or ultimately are made to help us. So we only know, most of us, when police show up, it's because there's a problem. Take with that the continued push towards being an authoritative figure that essentially challenges the notion that if my animal brain evokes fear, I will take out my gun and shoot you like they did for Philando Castile. So the notion that police, first of all, we need to educate ourselves on the role to the root, to the core of what is the role of police, but more importantly, what are the policies that are being put into place and those that are funding the policies. And certainly you start to then get into, well, vote. Well, okay, let's talk about the voter suppression that happens, right? And how do you start to unpack what that even looks like, and knowing that it wasn't long ago that Black people couldn't even vote. And then when they did go to the voting polls, people were surrounding them, similar to the death threats that Jearlyn received, and watching them with glaring eye in hope to drive a fear. And certainly because the families would either face fear or wouldn't have the example of mom and dad going to the polls to vote. There's so many layers to this complex problem, but I believe it starts with defining the expectation of the job description that we all believe collectively of what we want it to be. Let's start with the ultimate outcome, the utopian place that we believe that should be the relationship. And again, when it comes to people with different perspectives and different walks of life, you're never going to arrive at the perfect solution. And how could I say that in a moment of fear that as a police officer that I might not shoot somebody either? So I've tried to, as best as possible through this process, especially now, have empathy and grace as I educate myself and then educate those around me. But I believe, to answer your question, and certainly within our organization, both with Wolves and Lynx, we recently, as of coronavirus, like, what was it, Tuesday, Wednesday, Thursday? We just had a conversation with the police chief and the mayor, and with those who have a platform to create influence. And again, it's not about shut up and dribble. What I do is not symbolic of who I am. I'm a citizen of this country, and I'm a citizen of this world. And it is my responsibility to exercise my God-given right to share the essence of my soul. So through that, we collectively have to put positive pressure and educate ourselves around the policies that are killing us and figure out different ways of bringing new solutions to the table.
6 decades ago, growing up in Gary, Indiana, the police officers lived in the community. Now, of course, all the communities were Black, let's just put it that way, unless you went out to the suburbs. But we knew the ones that were policing our neighborhoods. They would come to the backyard and have some barbecue every now and then. They'd ask my mother to cook a little bit, and they were mostly Black. Some were Hispanic. Those conversations were necessary to have too, right? When the police get to know the community, know the people of the community, and the community gets to know the police, we got something. We got something. If you pull up next to me and I lean over and look at you, oh, John, what you doing trying to scare somebody? What are you doing? You know, don't pull up next to me like that. Just honk and say, hey, Jearlyn. We don't do that anymore. The police are just as afraid as others, as community members. I'm not saying all of us are afraid, but many police officers are just as fearful for their lives. They have been told and taught and trained to get home safely. And we've had the talks with our sons and our daughters to get home safe. So there's nobody really talking. So I know I keep saying this, but it really is integral to the success of whatever movement it is. This is a confluence of pandemic and global protest wave. That's an actual thing. That's an actual thing. They converge together. And for us to get through this, we need to come together. That's it.
I want to add to that. I wrote down, we fear what we don't know. So the fact that, as Jearlyn states, you've got black police officers who are in black neighborhoods. You look like me, you sound like me, have a seat at the table, let's eat. Add to that, throughout the course of history, police have been kicking the behinds of black people throughout the course of history. Why do I want to be someone who's whooping my tail on a daily basis? Then add to that, I'm a shining example of a black man who's gone through what we ultimately only think we can be. How do we get out of this trauma? You can play sports through basketball, football, or you can go rap, or you can sell drugs. And I would share with you that it's not every single one of those families that are having those conversations. But what's the image that we're seeing all the time? And media, by far, is so complicit in their, if it doesn't bleed, it doesn't lead. If you imagine what happened even with the riots here and the looting, how everyone was glued to the television. But nobody talked about the peaceful protests, and they didn't highlight the positive conversations as you would go to George Floyd's now memorial site around how so many people, black, white, Asian, it did not matter. You didn't look like me, but they were handing out water to everyone, to our brothers and sisters, that they were giving out a Band-Aid to my daughter because she scraped her elbow. They don't show that. So the problem is so much deeper, even just within that vertical, that we need to have conversations to at least understand and relate to it as best as we can, to ultimately put pressure on the policymakers to say, never again. And it will take some time.
So wait a minute. So for me, I disagree with you just a bit.
Oh, please, let's get it
Just a
then.
bit. All right. So here's the thing. I saw all faces in the protest. I didn't see just one of everything or more of one or more of the other. I don't care what city it was. I don't care where it was. It could have been around the world. It was amazing, the people that came together walking side by side, protesting, putting their fist up, singing a song, saying some protest words, whatever it was, they did together. Did anybody else see that? I saw that, just me and you, that's it. Did you see it? Did you see it? Did you see it? Did you see it? Annie, did you see it?
Yeah, but only one state has overturned qualified immunity. And so it's not just performative activism that we're celebrating, it's actual policy change that's not happening. We can paint Black Lives Matter on every single street in America, but until we stop glorifying and accepting the fact that a treacherous, murderous, exploitative group of people has created racism, but we're also saying they're too fragile to talk about it, is frankly bullshit.
Okay, then let's take a look at what it really means to have that moment, right? Like you're saying, if the people are in their homes and they're saying, I walked today. That was something I did. I walked today. Did you see me walk? Did you see me walk? I was walking with those black people. Did you see them? It was more than that this time, Annie. And it is about the laws. I agree with you. But that begins with leadership. Whoever is sitting at the top of the heap is leadership. That leadership is either going to take us together, where we're going to do something big and great, and we've done it before and we'll do it again. Or they're going to tear us down and divide us. Now, you can decide which side you're on in this conversation. But that's the bottom line. If leadership was to say to the whole country right now, the leadership in DC, including the Congress, House and Senate, including the Supreme Court, right? If they were to just say, we have to do this together. The pandemic got us together. There would not have been that many people walking without the pandemic. We would have been at work, we would have been having our cosmos, we would have been having fun. Our children would have been in all types of activities and camps this summer. But because of the pandemic, we had nothing else that we could do. We had nothing else to do but to get together. And each of us did it in different ways, whether you protested together, you used your feet and your hands. Others used their writing skills. Did you read the opinion pages? They were all over the place. Don't just look at social media. Look at it all. Look at it all. Those that are angry and pissed off at me because I look like the way I look. And I got the nerves to be able to speak my mind, just like they do. Read what they have to say so that you're prepared when you're faced with them. Be prepared. We have to do it, whether we like it or not. The pandemic pushed us into the streets. And guess who joined us? The animals. Animals came out because they didn't see us everywhere else. They too had to come out. Maybe they had a protest, I don't know. But this protest was brought about because we had the time to do it. We couldn't take it anymore, so we did it. And I'm grateful for it. It may be minute to many of us. It may be just a little trinket that we are able to accomplish. But that trinket could force us to go up and forward. That's my mantra every day, up and forward.
Hello, my name is Michelle, and I am an emergency physician. I practiced at Hennepin County Medical Center for about 30 years. I'm retired from practice now, but I wanted to just address the question that was previously came through on the chat box about why don't white people understand? And I really echo a lot of what you have said about the silver lining of COVID. As I practiced medicine for 30 years, what I discovered was, you know, your life is so busy. We were so busy in that emergency department. There's students there, there's residents there, and almost all of the patients I ever saw were very vulnerable for many reasons. As I grew a little older and couldn't move so fast, I started listening to stories more, and it was that humanity in the discussion and the revelation of what people were really like that just astonished me and made me understand that I have a ton of unconscious and probably very many conscious biases, but the opportunity to sit down and talk with people and hear their story was really eye-opening to me. So that's why I think a platform like this, maybe we won't develop policies and make big social actions, but I think the idea of getting to know more people on a very personal level really has a lot of purchase power. And every single person has a great story. We just need to have time to listen. That's what came together. Pandemic, a lot of time on our hands, a hot summer, an explosive circumstance. And so I think there's an incredible opportunity here for people who are like me and who are afraid of the word fragility because it means weak or it means, you know, unable to manage this or unable to have duration. I think this is a golden opportunity. And so I'm really thankful for this opportunity, but I do think that there's little tiny steps everybody can take. One is a really easy one, and it's just ask people what their stories are, because then they become people and not an object or not a stereotype, not a symbol. They're real.
We have a number of other questions, but before we go into those, I think we would like to see a video.
Let's ask ourselves why in this country in 2020, the financial gap between poor blacks and the rest of the world is at such a distance that people feel like their only hope and only opportunity to get some of the things that we flaunt and flash in front of them all the time is to walk through a broken glass window and get it. That they are so hopeless that getting that necklace, getting that TV, getting that chain, is that in that moment when the riots happen and if they present an opportunity of looting, that's their only opportunity to get it. We need to be questioning that why. Why are people that poor? Why are people that broke? Let me explain to you something about economics in America. And I'm so glad that as a child, I got an opportunity to spend time at Push where they taught me this, is that we must never forget that economics was the reason that black people were brought to this country. We came to do the agricultural work in the South and the textile work in the North. If I right now decided that I wanted to play Monopoly with you, and for 400 rounds of playing Monopoly, I didn't allow you to have any money, I didn't allow you to have anything on the board, I didn't allow for you to have anything. And then we played another 50 rounds of Monopoly, and everything that you gained and you earned while you were playing that round of Monopoly was taken from you. That was Tulsa, that was Rosewood. Those are places where we built black economic wealth, where we were self-sufficient, where we owned our stores, where we owned our property, and they burned them to the ground. So if I played 400 rounds of Monopoly with you and I had to play and give you every dime that I made, and then for 50 years, every time that I played, if you didn't like what I did, you got to burn it like they did in Tulsa and like they did in Rosewood, how can you win? There's a social contract that we all have, that if you steal or if I steal, then the person who is the authority comes in and they fix the situation. But the person who fixes the situation is killing us. And if the social contract is broken, why the fuck do I give a shit about burning the fucking Football Hall of Fame, about burning a fucking Target? You broke the contract when you killed us in the streets and didn't give a fuck. You broke the contract when for 400 years we played your game and built your wealth. You broke the contract when we built our wealth again on our own, by our bootstraps in Tulsa, and you dropped bombs on us. You broke the contract, so fuck your Target. And they are lucky that what black people are looking for is equality and not revenge.
So we take a moment to breathe together, right? There was a lot in that, wasn't it? Did you understand what she was comparing? Did everyone understand it? And answer the question that I wanted to ask. Ask the question.
Could you come up to the microphone, please? And some people on the video did not hear it as clearly. So if you could, could you come up to the, and so we can hear the question, but also they couldn't hear the video as clearly. So as you answer, you can speak to those pieces that you saw.
Hi, my name is Caddy. I'm lucky enough to work in the recovery world, and I have been trained by Dr. Deetra Hawkins in Atlanta, and I've been trained to teach cultural competency. And so a lot of the things that are said here, I'm taking to heart. One of the things the maybe retired doctor said was listen to stories, but we're all much more alike than we are different if we give one another an opportunity to tell a story and talk, and that's one of the things that I try to teach. But I think one of the uncomfortable things that I wanted to ask was exactly what that woman said in that video was, why did we see white America saw so many brown-skinned people busting into Target, busting into Cub, busting into Speedways, busting in and burning up both a community business as well as a neighborhood business, and it affected both black, white, and everybody in between. And I think that's where there's a lot of confusion, not so much with me, but I had a conversation with a good friend, and she's like, why is George Floyd the martyr, and why is he look some way? And you answered that question. But I think there's just a lot of confusion about, we see all these brown faces doing all this damage, and why should we feel sorry for them? And that's not That's not what I think, but that's what it feels like is one of the really uncomfortable things that's going on. And I could cry even saying those words because it's not where I'm at. But I think what the woman said, you know, thank God we're taking property and we're not taking revenge. That was super freaking powerful. So I don't know if there's anything in there that's answerable, but thank you for all this.
So a lot of times you watch people of color be involved in looting and burning and that sort of thing, and people go, well, why is that? So many people get angry. Don't come to, you come to the neighborhoods and you're burning everything and you're doing this and you're doing this. Ridiculous. If you want to peacefully protest, then peacefully protest. But don't start burning. That's ridiculous. Okay. So let's just go back to the 20s, 30s, 40s, where there were crosses burned on the land of those black families that owned home and land, right? They would farm. The KKK would come in, sit up a huge cross and burn it. And then they would either rape the women, steal the children, or they would burn down your house. They would burn down your house. You were left with nothing and they had to rebuild. So if you want to know why people do this, it's a learned process that can be unlearned and possibly replaced. I really do believe that. But anytime you see people of color that are looting when there's a protest, understand that this has been taught. Just like she talked about Tulsa, Oklahoma. It was called Black Wall Street. My dear, dear friends have called me and said, what is Black Wall Street? And if you don't know, I encourage you to look it up. But the bottom line, just in a really quick understanding, is that it was where we had wealth. Black people had so much wealth, they called it Black Wall Street. And what happened? White people came with bombs. We're not talking about guns. They came with bombs and destroyed, what was it, 35 blocks, I believe, of buildings that held all the wealth. They had worked so hard to build this. And then people look at us and say, now why? Why do you do that? Things can be learned and unlearned and relearned. Or they can be learned, unlearned, and replaced. That is my thought and my thought alone.
Yeah, go ahead.
I applaud you for probably stating or asking a very uncomfortable question. It's important that we can have these kinds of dialogue to at least get to the root of, as best as we can, perspective. I think by focusing on the fact that, and I would share with you that when riots and looting were happening in my city, in my neighborhood, yours as well, all of ours, this is certainly an issue for the country. I would tell you that my first feeling when it happened was like, that's what they want you to do, right? You are fitting into, like, black people are now tearing shit up. Why? Because we've seen it before. So I think at the surface level, we start to look and analyze like, okay, it's black and brown people, but we all know that it wasn't just them, right? So rather than focusing on the color, how do we go deeper and start to focus on the issue or the issues? Also know that, when you hear about planted protesters that happen to be white and that you actually have seen them spray painting Black Lives Matter, or the woman in New York who walked up with a drill and pretended to paint the board, took a picture and like, great, got in her car and said Black Lives Matter. People are also looting the opportunity. People have been looting black folks for a long time. Look no different than our culture that's happening right now. And any commercial that you put on, it's laced with hip hop or some relevancy of culture. But the difference is, while you, by the color of your skin, were dealing with coronavirus, I was also dealing with coronavirus but I was also dealing with being black in America. That has always been the case since I've been born. So to have the perspective, and it's easy to say, they're tearing things up, and based upon the video, when talking about the social contract. And it's funny when you look at, those that champion life, liberty, and justice for all. That's in the fiber. It's supposed to be the fiber of contracts that we have in our own society. The only part that black people can take part of is 1/3 of that. Thanks for giving us life. Do we have liberty? Do we have justice? We don't. So I think that, and certainly from my perspective, it's less about the who's right and to be able to come to a common ground of morality, less than about the color of my skin, and anecdotally looking at, it's a black person that's burning down the building. Like, hear what she has to say around the contract and the social contract. And the contract, we don't have a contract, right? Now, the black-owned businesses that certainly were in our neighborhoods, yes. But do we even understand the gravity or the individual stories of those people that caused them to do that? It's so easy from a place of privilege, and I would share with you that growing up in South Minneapolis, where I've had people shooting outside of my home, when I first got the call from members and leaders inside of our organization, I was in Eden Prairie cleaning out my gutters. So I had some feelings about, what am I doing? Am I going to protest? Am I going to do, to help to bring about solutions? So my tone also changed. Because I don't understand, not a single one, whether you're black, brown, white, Asian, I don't understand why you would do that. But damn it, I can relate. I'm a 0 to 100 type of person, and I would tell you that if I would have went down because of how angry I was and how I cried, you'd probably see this 6'8" black man throwing bricks too. But I recognize that only plays into the stereotype. And certainly from a public perspective, I'm not falling into that. But do I relate to it? Do I relate to the anger? Do I relate to the passion in her tone? That's pain. When people scream, it's because it's an outward reflection of what's happening inside. And we naturally take a defensive posture, and certainly with those that don't look like us, to say, well, angry black woman, shut it down. Instead of being like, come here, sister. First, let me hug you. Second, let me hear you. And for those that say, well, I don't see color. No. I want you to see her color. Because there is difference in her color. There is difference in how she's treated. When you look at the hierarchy of order, white man rules all in this country. Second is white woman. Then it's black man. Then it's black woman. Let's not talk about all the other marginalized groups. Don't happen to be like a black woman who's also LGBTQ. We're in a lot of pain in this country. And it's so easy for us not to understand each other's stories and learn more because we can't relate to the perspective. So I think it's important when you see the black and brown people, rather than saying, why are you burning it down? Like, there's a reason you're burning it down, you're in pain. And yes, will those businesses be rebuilt? Yep. Will there be areas that say, thank you, now we can gentrify? Right? So there's so much that we can unpack there, but thank you so much for being vulnerable and asking a question like that. I think it's really important. Please, step up to the mic.
Hi, y'all. Thanks for having all of us. And I just want to take a second to acknowledge, like, one of the things I was just blown away by was how both of you set.
Please pull the mic up. Just pull it up so you can.
Tall
you can
problems.
take it out. If you can.
There we go. Let's try that. One of the things I was blown away from both of you that I thought is an amazing lesson for me to take home to my friends, family, et cetera, was just how you set this safe container for us all to experience this conversation in, and how that gave everyone permission to open up. So I just wanted to acknowledge you both for that. That is just such a beautiful way to have a conversation. My question is about the war on drugs and how that relates to modern day slavery, prison system. How, I think I saw a number, it was Black people are 13 times more likely to be incarcerated for a drug charge than other people, and how a disproportionate amount of people of color are the ones who are in prison serving crimes, where maybe a white kid on a college campus smokes a little weed and doesn't get arrested for that. He just gets a slap on the wrist. Also growing up in South Minneapolis, just seeing it around and seeing how the illegalization of these substances, that whatever you feel about them, has actually been a major funding source for the gangs that are in the communities, similar to the way during Prohibition that funded the different mob in the area. So I guess the question to you would be, how do you feel about drug reform as a policy change that could have an immediate impact on the way that police interact with people? And I guess just generally, what are your thoughts on that? And thank you both.
Right now? Okay. John asked me to speak to you first, so I'll do that. I don't know if anyone's had the opportunity to watch 13th. If you served on our board, you had to watch that. That was your first homework assignment. And you can watch, with the incarceration rate rising, what that meant for society. And basically what we have is miseducation, lack of education as the pipeline to prison. So it's estimated that over 85% of the people incarcerated are illiterate. When you are desperate, you do desperate things. Desperate people do desperate things, right? Not only do we use poor education and arrest for crack versus cocaine to incarcerate mostly Black men, though Black women are now on the rise. It has been said that during the time of private prisons, they had access to third grade literacy scores, public domain, and they built their beds based on those scores. In third grade, you go from learning to read to reading to learn. So likely, if you can't read by the third grade, your chances are bleak. Minnesota is 50 out of 50 for graduating children of color. And everyone says to me when we travel, but you're known for your extraordinary schools. Well, that's the haves, and then there are the have-nots. They're counting on us not to educate children because they ride that pipeline to prison. And then you take away a bread earner of a family and you've destroyed the structure of the family and fully marginalized people. Jearlyn did an interview with me years ago. And at the end of the interview, the mics were turned off, and she said, why? Why? Why are we the 50th, ranked 50 in the state to graduate children of color? Why don't we educate children? Why do we not value our children or others' children as we value our own, right? Love thy neighbor as thyself. And I said, because it's working for some. And the time now is to say, we're not going to allow this system to continue. It's a really frightening idea, a concept to me, that if you are put in prison for nonviolent crime, you lose your right to vote. Who's that working for? It's working for someone, but hopefully not for much longer.
I would address your question. Where are you sitting? And the lights are glaring. Thank you for asking that question. She's absolutely right on some of those statistics, that's for sure. But I would say capitalism cannot exist unless it is the have and have-nots. We live in a society where one thing that we are trying to reach is to be better, do better, have better, right? All of the commercials, it's been a perfect storm. Remember in the 90s when people were buying McMansions? You guys remember that? Why were they buying McMansions? Because the commercials told them to. And I do voiceovers in commercials, so yeah, I'm talking against my industry. But the industry was doing this because they knew that if we started thinking about, I want my house to be bigger than my neighbor's house. Remember those commercials? A car would drive up and she'd look at her husband and hit him and go, I want that car. Do you guys remember seeing those commercials? Or why do they have a house like that? Capitalism drives this ship. No one is asking here for us to have a communist community. I went to Russia, it changed my life. In Moscow, I was followed by the militia for 2.5 weeks. They kept asking me, are you a spy? Because I went to the embassy to visit a colonel that we met on the street at a pizza truck. When I finally friended an Armenian, she wrote me 12 pages in a letter. We were trying to befriend each other. The militia took that letter and I got 4 pages out of order. So to experience what it's like to be under the knee of communism, I have also experienced what it's like to be under the knee of capitalism. Because in order for us to be who we are as a strong, clear, capitalist country, someone has to be beneath another. What would it look like if that did not have to be? If you could erase that, inequality, equality, equality, and equity were added to the solution.
We do have a question. This is from Jay. For white people who've been raised to not see color and who are raised to treat everyone equal, no matter of race, gender, age, sexuality, how should we move forward appreciating and acknowledging our differences, yet being thoughtful and sensitive to other life experiences? After being raised this way and now being asked to see color is uncomfortable, which we all need to do, get uncomfortable. But the rules are confusing. When talking to my black friends and asking them the rules, I get different answers on what they want from us and from me. And there doesn't seem to be a consistent set of rules. More often than not, they have very different answers. I think most people want to do better and do the right thing. How do we maneuver through it and do the right thing?
So for me, it's all about cultural intelligence. Building our cultural intelligence is something we should do daily. And that comes with information, right? So if you go to the library, if you go to a bookstore, there are just throngs, myriad books on culture. So if I'm going to Russia, I read the Russian book, I take a couple of Russian classes, right? I know how to greet people in that language, but more importantly, how do I eat at the table? How do I address the elders in Moscow? Those are in books, right? So when you're traveling, learn the culture before you go. Americans, we have a habit, and I have witnessed it in my travels. We have a habit of acting like, I'm here. Aren't you happy I'm here? I know you've got to be happy that I'm here. I'm going to spend money and do what I can. Oh, is it not working? So cultural intelligence is really key. How many of you actually know right now that if all of a sudden anarchy opened up in your neighborhood, you knew who to call to come and move you out of your home with your family in no time, in the dark of night, 2:38 a.m.? Who could do that? Do you know who to call? There is a whole culture here in this country that knows who to call. They know exactly where to get the food, where they can go and talk to people and say, look, I need this, this, and this. Can you get that for me? And they go, oh yeah, I got a guy. I got a guy. He knows how to get that. But we don't know that, do we? We don't know who to call. Cultural intelligence. We have so many cultures here. I had a conversation with 2 Somali people at a casino one time. We're sitting side by side. And he kept grumbling, and I would hear him say, black people, I can't stand black people. You black. How does that work? So finally I stopped and I said, let me ask you a question, do you mind? I said, can you tell me what it is between Somali and us, African Americans? What is it? Do you not like us? He says, I can't speak for everyone. I said, and I can't speak for everyone either. But can you just tell me? He says, you guys are lazy. You don't go to school. This country has done so much for you. And I went, can we go to another space? And we went to another space, the three of us, just three of us. And we had a 2.5-hour conversation that was so enlightening. We were all changed in that day. And I realized once again, it was cultural intelligence. For those that don't know what it is, do your research. It's integral for us to be global citizens. Our children are. Our children are global citizens, whether we like it or not. And they are receiving a cultural intelligence test every day when they're at school, in their churches, in their communities. It's cultural intelligence.
Jay, thank you for the question. I think as we've shared, at least as I've shared, I want you to recognize that I have color on my skin. And recognize that there is a difference in how you as a white man in America are treated differently than I am, not because of our intelligence, not because of anything other than just on the surface, the skin suit that I wear automatically creates that challenge. I also applaud the fact that you're uncomfortable, because without discomfort, there is no change, right? You're stretching yourself. And to the point of having conversations with several Black people, I would ask in return, in having several conversations with white people, do they all have difference of opinions and different aspects of how they've grown up? And the answer would be yes. So nobody has the right answer until they look inside of themselves first. And to recognize that your privilege of having white color on your skin in this country offers up a different perspective than others. And then I would question and say, would you like to be a Black man in America? And if the answer is no, then start to dig into why. And certainly, as with all prejudices we all have, all stereotypes that we all place in front of us and we all discriminate, there's a difference between the prejudices and the racism that ultimately is created by the system that continues to oppress. So no matter what walk of life we are in as Black people, first and foremost, we're judged differently by the color of our skin, but the way in which we interact at the polling stations, or in trying to purchase homes, there have been systems that have been designed to say, no, because you're Black, because you're different, it's not allowed. So I think that, again, it starts with you. The fact that you're on this call, it takes the first step of your desire to learn more. The old adage is you can't force a horse to drink water. You can only lead it there. Not only do I want you to drink the water, but it's got to come from initiative that you push forth within yourself. And in recognition of the fact that we are different. We want you to recognize our difference. But how do we ultimately form a pathway towards solidarity? I believe food, music is a common thread that can bring us all together. We all know the euphoria that we feel no matter what type of food that we eat. And through conversation, the ability to sit down across from each other and just listen, to personally learn their stories. I would share that for those of you who have asked questions today, I've got a snippet of connection with you more now so than ever, because what you shared is a small piece of what I see at the surface, but ultimately I know there's so much more below the surface from what I see. We have to continue to do this. We have to continue to stretch ourselves to be uncomfortable. We have to go into North Minneapolis and realize that, no, I'm not going to get shot. We're all afraid because we fear what we don't know. Media also perpetuates the stereotypes. And looking at what we see, I had a local high school basketball coach to me say, if it weren't for sport, I probably wouldn't have understood the diversity that I needed to know more about not just Black people, but everyone. Growing up in my small town, again, limited experience, limited exposure, he saw Black people as only athletes or murderers because he saw them on television. I was taught that when I was going through my after-career crisis and moving over to a corporate world where initially I was the best and I had my shield and my sword, and I was at the pinnacle of my career as that gladiator of being a professional basketball player. When I moved into the corporate world, I was naked. I also knew that in having dreads, when I had them, and deciding at the time even to grow out a beard, that you would look at me differently because of what you saw on TV and what your experience from birth up until that point had taught you around what someone like me who stands in front of you, a hulking 6'8", dreads, beard, without a single word ever coming out of my mouth, you fear me. Until I open my mouth and say, hey, I love you.
So this hair thing is a big deal. It's a big deal, John.
It is a big deal.
I'll never forget when I first moved up here, there was a group called SAS, Sisters Associated for Self-Support.
This is going to be good, so I have to give you this.
Oh my.
Keep that mic.
I was in a group called Sisters Associated for Self-Support, SAS. We would get all dressed up for lunch and we'd have all these major discussions. Well, the woman that was in charge, she decided to be the speaker for that event because she had long braids. She wore her natural hair. She let it grow. And she didn't want to wear the suits, the black suits or the gray suits when the women had to wear the bow ties that you actually tied across. You remember that?
Oh, yeah.
Right? So her boss said to her, you either cut your hair, change it. We don't want to see braids. Our people would get nervous. Our people would get nervous. Our people would get nervous. And she took them to task by suing them. And she won. And it changed the way Black people could come to work. Then they started doing the whole Friday, right? Casual Friday. Well, Casual Friday to one is different than the other. You may wear khakis and a polo shirt. Somebody else got Daisy Dukes on. Don't tell me you don't know what Daisy Dukes are. That's their Casual Friday. So they had to redefine and redefine until they felt like they got it straight. What do you say to an employee that cannot afford the clothes that you want them to wear on Casual Friday? How does that work? Do you give them a gift card and say, go out and buy these things so that you have these to wear to work? Or do you say, what do you have that you feel is appropriate? Can you tell me? Can you show me a picture? Or what do you think you'd like to wear for Casual Friday? Clothes change everything. It changes everything. I tried to wear some Asian, you remember in Japan and in Philippines, they would have those beautiful, the language written all over the pants, and they would come to about right here. And then I had a little, it was terrible on me. When I look back, I said, what did that say to people when they saw me like that? What was my conversation, my silent conversation? That's what clothes can do. That's what hair can do. Don't forget that. So when we're having a conversation, we're having more than one, right? Because I'm going to look at you and say, oh, okay, he's probably a businessman, right? I'm going to say, oh, she's fun, and she's probably hot. Are you warm as I am? I'm so warm, right? So I look at each of you and I can determine, or at least in my head, I think I'm determining what you may be like. And if that leads your conversation, you've lost. You've lost. So this hair of mine, I have people say, your hair was so short yesterday. How did it grow that long? Oh, come on.
The next question is a perfect segue into our last section. What are the top 3 things to do in the next year to move the dial? And they would like to hear from each and every one of you.
It starts, one, inside of me. I've got to continue to educate myself. 2, the external influence that I'm able to create based upon my interactions with my family, coworkers, and my community has to come to life with a purpose, which my purpose is my life's work is in loving. So how do I bring all aspects, when we talk about the sharing of information, the sharing of food, really, in my opinion, that's code for love, right? I'm putting positive energy into something. So based upon my circles of influence, it has to come to life in my daily work. And then lastly, I think those who are in the position of power in our country, and more notably in our own local communities, getting a detailed analysis and an understanding of every candidate and how they ultimately impact the world that I currently live in, and exercise my power to vote. And then it's incumbent upon me to then go backwards and again affect my community. So I think it's cyclical. Me, circle of influence, connecting with those people that can evoke change or who are in positions of power in government and put pressure on them through the varying ways in which it comes to life in programs for our organization, from a professional standpoint, and then also personally.
Well, I believe in order to move the dial that we had a good conversation tonight. And you may have some pearls of wisdom out of this, or you've had questions answered, or maybe questions began from something that we said. Share that. Share with anyone you know that you think is not in the conversation, Find books, magazines. Like if you are into finance, then look up Black businesses, look up Black Enterprise magazine. All of a sudden invite all your friends and family over and say, hey, have you heard of them? Have you heard of this magazine? Well, let me tell you about it and why I think it's really impressive. Maybe you will even want to invest in some of them. Find a way to bring something into your home, in your personal space that you haven't had there before when it comes to people, where they're from, who they are, what they look like, how they dress, their hair, their smell. I had a chance to perform with my family with Ladysmith Black Mambosa. And they are amazing, by the way. But they believe in not, well, let's just say the hygiene was different from what I understood. And you get used to it. You may not want to, but you get used to it. Brilliant minds, brilliant singers and performers. And their conversation was amazing, what they knew. So just because they don't look like you or smell like you or dress like you, take a listen. I was in New York singing at a town hall, concert hall, and I was sitting by myself in a Starbucks that was jam-packed. I had one seat, it was my seat in front of me. Everybody came in and they went, got their drinks and left. A young man, 32 years old, Hispanic, came to me and said, may I join you? Of course you can. And we stayed friends for years. We would talk online and I'd see his children, he'd see my children. It was just quite remarkable how relationships can begin in the most unusual places. So take what we've said tonight, research it, see if you believe us or you disagree with us. Have that conversation too. That'd be great.
Now it's time for the teacher.
Oh. I guess the advice I would give you beyond what we've said this far is don't believe the myth of separate but equal. In our nation, your zip code determines your access to education. and that is wrong on every level. Beyond bags of groceries, give like no one's watching and that you don't get accolades for what you're doing. Rather, do it because it's the right thing and no one's watching, and then do it again, and then do it again, and then keep doing it. I told you on a call when we were preparing for this, Whitney Houston sings a song, I believe the children are our future. Teach them well and watch them lead the way. Besides what your color is, we want all children to have an opportunity to lead with their own lives and that they have an opportunity to make the world a better place because they matter. So value children, don't underestimate them, and don't underestimate yourself because they're watching. So be careful of the things you say and be careful of the things you do. And if you want to learn more, please look at our website. It's literacymatters.org. And then if you can spell that, you thank a teacher. And I thank all of you for joining us. Your time is your most precious resource. For those of you that are joining us remotely, thank you for sitting still for 2 hours. And for all of you here, thank you for making the trip. Thank you so much. Tammy?
Thank you definitely to Deb, to John, to Jearlyn, to the entire audience who's on Zoom, to the entire audience that is here. We thank you, and to everyone else who's behind the scenes as well. The one thing I wanted to make sure, and also thank Robin DiAngelo for doing the introduction for us as well. We are going to continue the conversation. We are going to do Race Matters Part 2. We're really focusing on youth in high school, 9th to 12th grade, and that will be coming in August. We will continue our conversations. Deb has done a great job of putting together some resources and books and next steps, really concrete next steps. I know a number of people have asked. So those will be on our website as well as through social media as well. And for people who would like to stay for a few questions here, certainly we'll be here for a few more minutes. But again, thank you and applause for every single person in the audience and on Zoom. Everyone, thank you so much.